Hello again and welcome to the ones joining us now. In this streaming I will speak about texture and everything to do with texture. Why? Well, because most of the common mistakes that I see in retouches, or basically in every workshop that I've given, I realized that there are 3 stages where photographers or retouchers ruin images, So one is the raw file. They ruin the raw file, like they open it and they process it in a way that they ruin the image. The other one is texture. When they kill and clone, they ruin the image. And the other one is sharpening. Oh, sorry, and dodging and burning, yeah. So a lot of retouchers ruin the image in the process of dodging and burning because they do too much or too up close. Okay, can you hear me alright, by the way? Then the mic works. So what is texture? In an image like this, texture would be the skin and the hair, right? Not the texture of the stitching. Maybe here, where it's in focus, maybe a little bit of the stitching of the clothing is texture. So we definitely would not call the shape of the eye texture, or the shadows around the mouth, or the highlight in the mouth, right? But texture is not the same in every image, because in this image the texture of the skin is not really texture. In this image the big chunks of hair are the texture, and the lines in the clothing, or the wait some bigger things like flying hairs or crossing hairs, or this, so in this case we wouldn't say the texture is the skin texture, because it makes no sense, because you can't see it from afar. In an image like this, for example, the same thing happens even more. There is no skin texture. In this image, the texture would be the hair and the clothing, the wrinkles in the clothing is considered texture here. Okay, and obviously the wrinkles in the clothing, well, not this one, she's naked, but the wrinkles in the clothing of these images wouldn't be texture. Well, let me find, for example, right? The wrinkles in this clothing is not texture. The wrinkle in this clothing, in the girl, yes, that's texture, because of the size of the image and because of the the amount of space it occupies. So basically what I'm saying is texture depends on the size, resolution, and the framing of the image. So when we are talking about texture, we are talking about frequencies. Okay, so frequencies can be seen in pretty much everything. For example, we are more familiar with sound frequencies. It doesn't confuse you so much when you say, why can't I hear the whistle? Because it's in a frequency that is too high. So you understand what that means, Okay, so in this case, the texture of the skin is not even a frequency, okay? So the frequency that would be the size of skin in this image, for example, right? Let's do original. So the texture size in this image is right? Around like 20, 25. See? That's the radius. That's the texture radius, the size. Now, if I go here, that size of brush evidently is not going to be skin texture. So we would call texture from now on the radius between 0 and 30 in an image. Okay, so that's what texture is. So it has nothing to do with skin or hair or hair on the face. No, because maybe you're retouching a shoe, and then what? You're not gonna clone. You don't use the healing and the clone in the shoe because there is no skin. No, texture is everything that we consider high frequency in an image. Now, what is frequency in an image? So, like in music, I'm gonna use this as a board. Okay, so like in music, or an image can be seen like this, and I'm not talking about the histogram, by the way, where this would be the high frequency. Oh, now I get it. The other day someone was complaining in the group that you can't see the cursor when you're in gray. It's really annoying. There. Okay, and this would be considered the low frequency. Oh, sorry. Okay, so a famous example of this, and you can see that example in my notes when I explain frequency separation, is the Marilyn and Einstein image, right? Do you know that? Einstein, Marilyn. It's a very famous illusion that I use to explain the phenomenon of frequency separation. So you can see that when you see it, like when you see the thumbnail, right, is clearly Marilyn Monroe. And if I tell you that this person is Einstein, you would not believe it. But when I open the image and you see it bigger, there is no Marilyn. You can't even see Marilyn, right? So that's the thing. This is the high frequency of Einstein with the low frequency of Marilyn Monroe. And this is, by the way, this, you know how weird this looks? In my workshops, sorry. Actually, there are everywhere. Pretty much everyone has it. So if you go to the group, if you go to the group, there's probably a copy of my notes somewhere. Yes, it's just low. It's the bot is working like me today, you know. It's kind of like semi brain. Okay, so can you see how weird this image looks? Okay, this is not really. This is how the images look to me when you filter them. Okay, this is how obvious it looks to me when you filter the image, and I don't know why I never came back to this image whenever I say don't filter the images, because the texture deattaches from the shape. Okay, and this is actually a good example, because in this case the shape of the photo, right, is not even his. But when you blur the low, or when you mix the low, or when you blur selectively on the low, or when you paint on the low, basically you're changing the low frequency, the shape of the image, while keeping a very small radius of texture. So let me explain it differently, okay? Because this might be a bit exaggerated. So, hmm. Okay, so let's grab something like this. Okay, and now I'm gonna do this. Now let's extract the texture from this bit of image. Let's close the newspaper. There we go. So we could do a high pass. You know, high pass is easy. It's not accurate, but for this example, it's simple enough. So I'm going to extract the texture, right? So usually when we do frequency separation, what we do is we blur, right, until texture that you want to work with goes away, right? That's the basic principle of frequency separation. So basically, as long as all the texture went away, that's considered like a good radius. Oh, sorry. So it's 14, right? Okay, so I'm gonna do a high pass of 14. And this is what happens when you extract that texture. So now, does it look like skin to you? No, right? That's because having skin tone and texture is not enough to look like skin. It separates because the shape doesn't have the same light as the texture does. Now, what happens if I do another high pass, like, oh, because when you do a separation, right, you have the 14 radius on top, and where is radius of 15 or radius of 25 or radius of, you know, let's do that. Let's separate the image. So we're gonna do a Gaussian blur of 14 and then a apply image, right, layer 5, okay, I should have used the never mind, I'm gonna do it again because I messed up. Create a group, there we go. Gaussian blur, apply image, and linear light. There we go. Okay. So, like we said, we have the texture of 14 here. We have the texture of 2 here, the texture of 3, 5, 8 pixels. By the way, remember that when we say, you know, like 14, that means that our biggest texture is gonna be 14 pixels, okay? That's what radius means. I don't know if you knew that, but it's pretty important. So when I say the frequency of 14, I mean size 14 pixels texture, okay? But what happens with texture like size 20 or 35 or 150 or any of the other textures in the middle, right? They are in the low. So when you do anything on the low, you are pretty much eliminating most of the image density. Okay, anything that you do in the middle, you are eliminating, and you're getting closer and closer to this image in the bottom. Of course, you're never gonna go that far, but this is how it looks when you filter an image. Like the texture is detached from the actual skin, because texture is not just one radius, okay? You can imitate texture, but you need more. See? So between these three, it's starting to look like skin. Even if there is no shape yet, but still, this already looks like skin. This, the 14 radius alone doesn't, because that's not what skin is, okay? That's not how texture looks. So now that we have defined that texture depends on the size of the image at the frame, and that we can't say that from 0 to 15 that's texture and that's it, because what about 16 or 20, you know? It's still texture, bigger texture, but still, that's what makes the image believable. All the other middle frequencies, you know, not the low and the high. So let's go back to there we go, to an image like this. This was actually an interesting example because the texture on her chin was so different to the rest of the face that I had to replace it completely. Like, I didn't even like heal and clone. I simply, like, I think I used this chick. Wait. Yeah. And I replaced it. Oh, I painted without wanting to. The same in the nose, because she had really bad makeup. So I actually cleaned this side and pasted it on this side. If you look at really closely, well, actually I got rid of things on this side that I didn't get rid of this side, so it wouldn't be obvious. Okay. And when in retouching, right, when we do critiques in the group, we usually say that texture is inconsistent, right? That was one of the questions. How do you know if the texture in the image is consistent? It's not about having the same texture everywhere, okay? Because if you look at this face, or if you look at anything, like anything else, not just face, right? Not just skin. If you look at this, actually this could work, you know, the texture of the denim, okay? Ivan, well, sure. I mean, if you want to spend the next 2 months of your life painting like every single pixel, go ahead. But the thing is, it would still not look like the rest of the texture in the image. So I chose to replace it because it goes better with the rest. If you dodge and burn it, it's a lot more time consuming, and in the end, the end result was supposed to look like this. So why would I spend 3 hours dodging and burning if I can replace the texture in 15 minutes? I mean, dodge and burn is a great technique, and it's my favorite actually. It's the thing that changes the image the most. But it's not to be done, it's not to be used for everything. There is one retoucher that I know in Spain, and he's not really good at cloning, according to himself. I've never seen, his cloning. So he dodges and burns everything. So I'm thinking it takes a lot of time to finish an image. I mean, honestly, he's probably really good at it by now, like really good at dodging and burning. Daniel, none of the above. I literally cutted the chin and pasted it in the chin, and then painted over and yeah, that's what I'm showing. I literally moved it, transformed it a bit, let's turn off the dodge and burn, and painted on it. Now, it's not always going to work, and you need to be really careful where you get the texture from, and make sure that the new texture is consistent with the surrounding areas of the new texture, because now it looks kind of blurred, so I probably sharpened it, see, and I didn't use it at full extent. So sorry, I actually don't remember how I did it, but probably I used a combination of lighten and darken, but in different yeah, that's probably what I did, in different opacities. So I used more of the lighten than the darken. I think I did something like this because of the way the other one looks. See? And then I cloned on top. So it takes a bit of time, but certainly not as much time as it would take to dodge and burn each and every single pore. Now, the first step for being careful, like getting good texture, is the raw file. So let's go there. This is one of the examples that I use more often. This is the original image. And I always say texture is not about sharpening, it's about density. And most of the texture is in the darks. So if you want an image with a lot of texture, there's no way you're gonna get there if you start with an overexposed image. So when I saw this image, the first thing I did was put the exposure down. So as you can see, when you push the exposure down, all the texture reappears. I could recover the highlights, but I can't only recover the highlights, otherwise it just looks weird because it's a lot of light that I need to recover. So, but now the image is too dark, so I'm gonna bring the brightness up to compensate. So isn't this the same? Like if I'm pulling down the exposure and pulling up the brightness, it's the same, but it's really not, because exposure works from here, while brightness works from here. So actually I can show you that, because there is a guy who created this PSD. What's his name? Do I have it? Yeah, Edmond Amira Wan. Okay, so brightness and exposure. There we go. So if I put the exposure up, this is what it does. See? It works from the edge. And the brightness, see, works from the midtones. I love this. I love this PSD because it's so much better to see it graphically than hear it from me, because if you hear it from me, you need to trust me, but in here you can see it. So when you have an image with a lot of highlights, then if you pull down the exposure and you pull up the brightness, then the light of the image will look the same, will look as bright, but without so much highlight. So basically what I'm doing is this. I'm pulling down the exposure and pulling up the brightness. So see, the midtones remain the same, but my highlights are a lot lower. Host wall. Okay, so everyone who follows my Twitch can answer host wall. What do they think about Capture One and Lightroom? I used to take the time in every workshop to explain the differences between Camera Raw, Focus, Capture One, Lightroom, and I stopped doing that like 7 years ago. Between 7 and 5 years ago, I just stopped. I don't explain the difference anymore, because Capture One got so much better, so much better than Lightroom, and not even mentioning Focus, because it's I don't think there's a slower software than Focus. So I don't explain the difference anymore, and I say Capture One is better. Take my word for it. Or try it for a month. You can download the trial. Just try it for a month and see what you think about the software. The only main difference is that you need to get used to working in sessions instead of catalog, because if you have to import images, it's not meant to work like I mean, you have the catalog because Lightroom people ask for it, but working with sessions is a lot more efficient, because you don't need to import anything. You can use for what do you mean batch? I've done catalogs in Capture One and it works great. I mean, yeah, I have a Mac Pro. I don't know how it works in a normal computer, but by the way, Flip Jones, I recommend Photo Mechanic for cooling and organizing, even for tagging and changing the metadata and all of those things. Photo Mechanic is so fast, so fast. Yes, color interpretation is much better in Capture One than Lightroom. Today is not about color, so oh yeah, wedding. Completely different market, I guess. If you have 500 images, I don't know, yeah, I have no way of saying if it is better or not, because I've never actually opened 300 images, like never in my life. Okay, so back to getting the best texture from a raw file. So now I've pulled down the exposure and pulled up the brightness now. So that way I make sure that my highlights, I know what batch is. Sorry. Yeah, I know what batch is. I meant why would it be better for batch work? Because in my mind, batch is like 50 images, 60 images for a catalog, not 500 for a wedding. So I didn't understand why it would be better for batch. Anyway, so now I have enough information in the light to keep all of this like nice texture. So let's go back to the raw again to see what it was before and how it is now, only by changing the exposure and the brightness. Okay, only by changing that. Now texture is also contrast, right? So if you increase the contrast, you are going to have more contrast between the dark things on the skin and the light things on the skin. So that will create even more density in the skin. Now, the problem with adding contrast is that shadows will probably go down a lot, so we will recover some of those shadows like this. So let's go back again, right, to the original. And remember, this original has 140 of sharpen, okay? And now my rendition has no sharpness. But if you see the original and mine, you will agree that mine looks sharper than the original because it has more density in the skin. So you can't start from this image, you know, or a flat light image, and then sharpen it in Photoshop to get the texture. That is not going to work. You need to start from a file with already a lot of texture from the raw to improve that texture after. Now, what do you feel about clarity and structure? Okay, I don't recommend using clarity and structure in the raw unless you are planning to do really little in Photoshop, okay? Because you can't control the radius, okay? The radius of the clarity. Basically, let's go back to the image. The difference between clarity and structure has to do with radiuses. So, there. So, I'm going to create a manual high pass, okay? So structure will create, right, a sharpening like this with only the texture. So when you move up structure, it will apply contrast on this radius. And when you use clarity, clarity is going to detect the shadows and highlights of each image and determine a radius that enhances those shadows and highlights. But here's the thing. Maybe clarity will determine that the highlights are like an average of 250, right, radius, and I actually didn't want to use that radius, you know, to enhance the highlights and shadows. I want to use a bigger radius, like 600. And the thing is, I can't control that in clarity in raw. I have to settle for the radius that the software considers correct. And I'm all about control, you know, if it is. That's the thing. No, it's not because of that. Clarity in clarity is quite there. Clarity is actually quite good in terms of halo. There's not going to be any visual halo. But the thing is, it's going to use a radius that you don't decide. So I rather not use anything that I don't decide the whole process, okay? Now, once you have, a file, this is way too much contrast. There. So this is what I call a texture healthy file. If you start with something like this, then your final image will look really, really textured. If you start with something like this, then probably your final image won't look as sharp around the head. Let me see. Actually, oh yeah, it's true. In the background, I didn't see that. Well, but you can always use a mask. That's not the real problem of clarity, unless it's not the problem that I find in clarity. Oh yeah, let me see that file. Ivan was asking me about what happens when the light is flat. Oh, people, I keep saying this like to everyone. Don't use Google Drive with clients, because this little step, it's really fucking annoying, really unprofessional for the client to have to do that, like ask you for permission to see a file that was meant for them. I don't understand why Google Drive, if you send someone a link, I fucking gave that person permission. That's why they have the link. It's a really inefficient way to, share files. Imagine that you send a file to a client and it's meant to print right away. So you were done with the job, you send the file and you go out, you go, I don't know, shopping or whatever. Well, pandemic and all, that wouldn't happen, but still, what happens? You go away, right? You're not in your computer anymore, and your client sends you the request, and you don't see the notification in your phone, so the file doesn't get printed, and you never work again. That's how I see it. I have a thing with efficiency. I mean, I've been. If you meet my mother, this all becomes really clear. But I was brought up by a mom that was highly efficient. Sorry? Sí, la llamo por Zoom. Pero se va a hacer la buena. I could introduce you to my mom, but she would play so nice on the screen, so shy and downplay a lot. But that's not the mom I grew up with. She worked with people her whole life. She was in charge of talking to the client. She got the requests and handled the budgets, and she spoke to the clients when the things weren't done, and so on and so on. And I think she would rather just work the whole night through to get a file to a client when it was a deadline, like anything but miss the deadline. And that's how I brought up. In fact, when I work with people often, I don't do any masking. When I have a big project, I don't do the healing and cloning. I give it to someone else. So I work with a lot of people, and I'm always very respectful for people's times. Yeah, I still don't have access, Ivan. Ivan. Okay. Is this blown? If it's blown, there's nothing to do. Toot 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 toot. Well, first of all, are you the photographer? Did you have to put the light like 20 centimeters away from her? Couldn't you put the light a little bit further away? Why? If you wanted the background to be lit, just use a different light for the background and don't kill her with the light. Anyway. Okay, let me see. I would do the same but with a mask, because I don't want the background, to be so dark. Let me see. Yeah, I love Christmas songs. Deal with it. Come on. I'm pushing the saturation because this file does not have as much information as the other file, the phase 1 file, evidently. So when I recover the highlights, because I have less color information, then what I get is like slight desaturation. So instead of fixing it later in Photoshop, I'm adding more saturation now, so I don't have a problem later. I'm not actually like looking at the image and analyzing it. I'm just rolling a cigarette. Wait. Oh shoot. Okay. Let's see. Let's remove the mask. Pop up, pop, 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 pop. Pop up, pop, 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 pop. Don't worry. Be happy. Turu, tu, turu, turu. Trying to match the color of the rest of the skin, because as I said, when I recovered the highlights, I lost a bit of the That's it. What do you think? Would you say that it's better to go overboard with detail and color, and maybe after getting rid of what you don't need? Actually, that's what I do in pretty much every image. Yes. You there. That's how I would take the skin to Photoshop. Now it looks human, right? And the thing is, I wouldn't do a lot to this girl, you know, just removing the lines in the neck and the like hair on the thing. Try to find an image where the arm, the clothing in the arm is clean, and replace it. Philippe, remember what I said like maybe 10 minutes ago about why I didn't use clarity? Because I couldn't control the exact result. What do you think I feel about the skin, the skin tab in basically the skin tab in Capture or any other software is doing this. Look, it's blurring the image like this and putting it in color. You can do it in Photoshop as well. That's what it does. I don't like it, evidently. I hate evenness in skin, because skin has a lot of shades. It's not just one color, you know, it's not monotone. And the more you move that slider in the skin tab, the more it looks monotone, and it's horrible. Ivan, what do you mean the next steps? Explain yourself. I don't do anything that I can't control every aspect of it. Okay, so one more thing, and it's actually one of the questions, right, Lucas? Different kinds of photography. I'm not gonna retouch an image, Ivan. There's like, you can watch the other 10 lives that I did when I retouched an image from beginning to end, and then you see skin retouch. This is about texture, like, and texture alone. Different images. Okay, wait, let me check. There was one one of the questions, what's the criteria for retouching? Yeah. What's the criteria? Yeah, I already found it. Retouching skin depending on the kind of image, okay? Okay, so for example, I've seen, okay, retouchers take an image like this and then go and clone and heal the skin on the face. I have no idea what possesses you to do something like that. This is actually quite a simple image to retouch, and texture in this case would be the bumps on the hand. I don't know what this is. I'm guessing hair shadow, veins, wrinkles in the pants, rubbish on the wood. I would leave some of the nuts. I don't know how it's called in English. It's in Spanish it's nuts, like nuts. Yeah, noodles. Okay, so that is the texture of this image, not the skin texture. Like, that's ridiculous. Why would you go like really close and retouch the skin? No, this is the, remember the radius, the 15 radius? Okay, yeah, that applies to like pretty much all the images. So this is mostly an image that I would clone and heal, you know, on the surroundings. to make sure nothing distracts me. You know, like here I would probably replace this with a bit of grass like this, and maybe this light is too different and this is too dark. You know, that's texture in this image. But then again, I learned this from Anna. I wouldn't go, you know, to the darks of the background before, but now that I've seen how portrait photographers retouch, I would do this. Just get rid of any distracting things. But guys, this is not an image that you go and retouch the skin. That's not how it works. Now, this and this would be a beauty, and okay, again, this one. Distracting elements and distracting elements alone. I know it's freckles, but she has freckles in very old places, so. But see that I'm always looking at the, you know, let's say 14, so to keep it, you know, the 14 radius brush, and I don't zoom in because there's no point. There's no point in making this flawless, because if you make this flawless, it will look overdone. Especially if this is for a magazine, right? If this is a double spread in a magazine, then like each page is gonna be like half of the image. Let's say it's a billboard, right? Then if it's a billboard, then maybe zoom in a bit closer. You know, like a billboard that's gonna be hanging on the highway. This is a very billboardy image, by the way. But mostly because I'm selling the clothing, I'm gonna make sure that there is nothing, you know, out of place in the coat, which is my star, right, of the image. So no little hair, no broken, oh, how do you say this? When you need, someone needs, someone knows the name of the, el punto. ¿Cómo se dice punto en inglés? Punto de tejido. Exactly. Only things that you see from the far. Because if you overdo an image like this, then it looks fake and plastic. It's not stitching. No one knows. Threads. Okay, yeah, and the rest is dodge and burn. But I would dodge and burn the shit out of this sweater. There, that's the retouch. So I'm guessing none of you are knitters. Wait. Point. Oh, okay, so it's point. knitting point. Knitting point. I think it's knitting point. Anyway. Lint. I think lint is something else. Thread. Yeah, this is lint. Oh, I'm an idiot. Well, yeah, this is lint. This. But I'm asking about the shape, like this shape. See? The point, right? The knitting point. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, the knitting on the sweater needs to be perfect. There can't be any broken points like this. Because that's what you're selling, you know? And the skin, if you make it like flat and retouch every texture, then it's gonna lose reality. It's not gonna look real. So that's the retouch. Now, texture. What is texture? Enhancing texture. Okay, so there are different ways of enhancing texture. Okay, for example, one way is, of course, well, sharpening. That's evident. Another way is, I'm going to show different kinds of sharpening, by the way, but for now I'm going to show you something else. Sometimes one of the channels has better texture than the other channels. So I can get that channel and actually work on it, like maybe make it a bit brighter. And even more contrasty, and then select it all, copy it, take it to my RGB and paste it. And then you can use the luminosity of that channel to enhance details. Obviously not in the hair, but you don't have to use it at 100%, but if you want to lift this, like freckles, so using the luminosity of a channel works for enhancing texture. Another thing that you can do to enhance texture, let's open the freckled one. Actually, we can do it here. Anyway, it's work with luminosity masks. So yes, I'm sure that none of you knits. That's why you don't know. Ask your grandmother and she will know. Okay, so another thing that you can do, other than using the luminosity of the channel, using the luminosity of the image itself. If you select highlights, you know, Command click and then Command Alt Shift click to select the high highlights, and then you brighten only the high highlights, that will create contrast between the highlights and the rest of the image. So that will enhance the texture on its own. Now you can increase this effect by selecting the opposite of the highlights and darken it. So between the two, you will have more loose stitch. I think that's actually a good... we can move on though from... and if this darkening the rest creates really deep shadows, you can always go to the shadows and Command click and Command Alt Shift click to select the deeper shadows and take it out of the deeper shadows, or maybe just from the deeper shadows of your choosing. Like that. I don't know why you would want so many freckles on the girl, but if you want, that's a way to get them. Now, a different strategy. Wait, let me open the curl. Documents. Oh, I think this is small. Wait, let me see. Yeah, it's big enough. Okay. So another way of enhancing texture, okay, is creating a manual high pass and actually selecting the range that you want to sharpen and not everything else. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what a high pass is. It's gonna get a bit technical for a few minutes, but you know that in analog, right, you would expose the edges of the image to sharpen the image, to give the illusion of sharpening, right? Eventually, someone realized that they could have a mask, you know, like a real mask, like a black cardboard with little holes cut in it to expose through it. Something like a matrix. In printing, you can see matrices, matriz, in every printing process, like flexo. Okay, this is flexography matrix. It's plastic and matrix. Hueco. This is hueco. Holography is metal. Okay, so it's a lot more expensive to produce. And then offset, matriz, la chapa de offset, right? It's like this, and wait, where is it? Come on, okay, here. Okay, so matrices. Ironically, the matrix of printing process are also made of frequencies. It's really obvious when you look at the flexo one, right? It looks like a stamp, like a little plastic stamp. But this actually contains a lot of color information. So when you print, you have different frequencies with different colors, and that's how you print. Now, basically, a high pass in Photoshop, okay, it's a negative of the image, and that's how they would do it, right? They would place the negative of the image on top of the image in analog. So what happens when you put the negative of the image on top of the image? This is like basic math, right? If I have +1 over -1, what do I get? Or like this, +1 -1. What do I get? How much delay is it in the in the chat? Exactly. So when you put the negative on top of the image, what do you see in reality? The negative and the image cancel each other out and you would see black. So we are gonna put this negative in 50%. Sev? No. If you put the negative on top of the image, you're gonna see black. In Photoshop, you don't see black, evidently, because, well, the negative is not really transparent, you know? It's not see-through, like a negative is. But at this point, if this was a real image and a real negative, you would see black, right? What we can do is we can put this at 50%, and instead of seeing black, we will see, now it's right. We will see 50% gray. Now, what they would do is put the negative on top of the image and then use a kind of acid, okay, and shake the image a bit, so the image would blur, you know, the negative would blur. So now you wouldn't see black when you had the negative on top of the image. When you blur the negative is no longer an exact replica of the positive, so you would start seeing edges, okay? And the same thing happens here. If I blur the negative, oh yeah, sorry, you can't see me. It got dark really quickly. I mean, you should be looking at the screen anyway, you know, not at me. I know I'm pretty, but it's only distracting you from the actual work. I know Lydia has the hots for me, I know it. I always knew it. Okay, so if you blur the negative, you are going to start seeing those differences, okay, between the negative and the positive as edges, okay? It's not longer gray. Now you can see black and white. In reality, of course, it's slightly different. When you blur the negative, you start seeing white or gray. Everyone is following me so far? Because it's gonna get more technical and more complicated in just like a second, okay? So basically, this is how a high pass is created, okay? A high pass is a blur on the negative of the image. Well, should be, okay? Let me explain why should be and not is. This is a radius of 25 on a Gaussian blur, and this is how it looks, okay? It looks kind of like a high pass. But the thing is, the brilliant minds in Photoshop development realized that if this would sharpen the image, right? If you use this to sharpen the image, then, and it works, right? It sharpens the image. But if you add a contrast to this, right? Where's, I know, image, adjustment, contrast. So they did this. They added contrast to the opposite of a blur. So it would be good for sharpening more, you know? But the problem with that is that now it's not longer an exact opposite of a Gaussian blur. Let me show you. See, this is a Gaussian blur of 25 plus 50 contrast, right? Everyone saw that. Now, if I do another stamp now, and I do a high pass of 25, I get exactly the same. So now you know how a high pass is done. it's a Gaussian blur on the negative of the image with 50, 50 contrast in legacy, because, well, before that was the only contrast, right? When they developed Photoshop, there was no other contrast, it was only legacy. So that's what a high pass is. So far good? Everyone's following? Okay, so what's the problem with high pass? Okay, high pass is based on a Gaussian blur. And the problem with Gaussian blur is that it doesn't respect the edges. Okay, so if you use high pass for sharpening, all of your edges will become halos when in burst, because that's how Gaussian blur works. So what I recommend is that instead of using high pass for sharpening, okay, yes, because clarity is based on Gaussian blur, so that's the problem. So instead of using, okay, Gaussian blur for sharpening, we will use any other blurring, you know, technique, like for example surface blur, or median, because it's going to blur out the detail but it's going to respect the edges. Okay, there is no better both will sharpen the image differently, so let's try it, right? Let's do one manual high pass, but instead of using Gaussian blur, I'm gonna do this so I already have it. We are going to use median. Okay, so the radius will define the size of the texture to be enhanced. Okay, well, get more RAM. Okay, so this is sharpening with median. Okay, it does a really good job, no halos at all. And now let's try surface blur. The advantage that surface blur has is that you have two settings, the radius and threshold. So the threshold will determine the contrast of this gray layer, see? So I can have tiny texture and tiny contrast, or tiny texture and a lot of contrast. or big texture with really high contrast, or big radius with really low contrast. So this is actually a decision that you need to make yourself, okay? You need to learn by looking at this gray layer what detail will get enhanced and how much. It doesn't matter, Carolina. It's the same. It's the same principles. Okay, so now I'm going to do a stamp. Again, I can throw this away. So this is made with median, and this is made with surface blur. Okay, and now let's see how this one works. I like the consistency of the surface blur detail more than the consistency of the median. And let me explain why. Can you see how median actually sharpens more the edges, and surface blur is pretty even in the way it sharpens? It's a slight difference. But that's why I prefer surface blur, because all the radius that I chose gets sharpened in the same level, but with median, some of the detail gets like 50% contrast, and then other details get more contrast, and I don't like that about median, okay? But my advice to you is that you try with different blurring methods to see which one actually creates the high pass. I'm gonna use quotes, the high pass that you need for that specific image, okay? Now, something important is that once you get this layer, you're using a blending mode of contrast, right? To blend it. And remember that this gray layer thus also contains some color information. See, it's not just luminosity. You have some purple there, see, some brown, some yellow. Annoying cookie, I would clone it. Wait, the hair on the jaw, yeah, you clone it. But you don't need to clone it all. You know, for example, she has all these tiny hairs. I would leave them, and I would only clone the big ones, the ones that actually call the eye. You know, like for example, she has a lot of hair here. I wouldn't remove it all because that would be insane. I would remove the ones that actually call the eye. Now, let's go back to the sharpening, okay? I can't believe it's been like an hour and 40 minutes already. Okay, so, once you have the detail here, right? Let's say that you want to sharpen the freckles, but like a lot, but you don't like it that the highlights were already pretty sharp, pretty bright, right? So you only want to enhance the freckles, right? Not the highlights. So what you can do is you can clip a curve to the to your new high pass, and then you can simply remove the highlights. I did it wrong. There. My pulse has been better. Okay, there we go. See? So that way, now, this layer is actually enhancing only the darks and nothing of the light. Why is unsharp mask not used? You know what unsharp mask is? Exactly the same. It's that's why it's called unsharp mask, because it's a blur of the it's a blur of the negative of the image. Unsharp mask. Now, obviously you're not going to use this everywhere, right? You can just hide it and paint only on the freckles, because that's what you wanted to show. And you can do that pretty much with any, actually I'm going to use a soft brush there and be more subtle. So that way you get to sharpen the freckles without touching the highlights. Okay? And you can also do the opposite. You can oh, sorry, it's a black mask. There. You can also clip a curve, okay? And instead of getting rid of the highlights, you get rid of the shadows. What for? To enhance only the lights without making the pores, right? The dark parts around the lights darker. This is how it looks with the complete high pass. But if I get rid of the shadows, now I'm only brightening the lights. See? It's in linear light, so you can see it better. I wouldn't do this so strongly. So again, you can create a curve to get rid of the lights and only sharpen shadows, or you can create the opposite one and get rid of the shadows and only enhance the light. Daniel, you can desaturate it, you know, to avoid the color bleeding and some color banding as well. But I recommend to do it only if you see something off. Because, yeah, like if you see any color banding or weird things happening, then yes, you can desaturate the yeah, or maybe only that part, you know, just let's say you don't like the purple there, then you can desaturate that one, like that part. Come on, there. Or maybe not desaturated but shifted, because it doesn't have a lot of color information, but it has some. Okay. Other ways to enhance texture is to create a mid-tone mask. Okay, why? Well, you can use the mid-tone mask to actually make everything dark except the highlights and shadows, but you can also use the mid-tone mask for masking the sharpening. Let me explain why. Do you notice how the highlights, right, always have a lot of texture, and usually the shadows have noise, right? So if you sharpen the shadows, you get really sharp noise, and that's not good. And if you sharpen the highlights, the highlights already have a lot of texture. So let's say I want to sharpen, I want the detail, but only in the midtones. Okay, so I'm going to create, right, a mid-tone mask. Just new alpha, inverted to get white. Now I create the highlights, Command Alt Shift click to select the really high highlights, maybe a bit more. One more. There we go. Really, really high highlights. And I'm going to duplicate this and invert it to get the shadows. Yeah, that's good. And now I'm going to select my shadows and add my highlights and go to my mid-tone mask and make sure I have black in the background. Click backspace on the keyboard and erase. So now I'm gonna have white only in the midtones. And I can use that to mask my sharpness. So now the highlights already had texture and the shadows have noise, ugly noise that I don't want to sharpen. So I can sharpen my image only in midtones. And that one is really good. That, I mean, it's not good that I say myself, but so see, before there was like texture here, and here there was like little texture. Now it's even. What else can I show you? Oh yeah, move texture. Sometimes it happens that you have a highlight that is really like it ends very abruptly. So, Marito, remember that you can watch it later again and again and again. And as many times as you want. The video doesn't disappear, you know, when it stops streaming. You can watch it. I'm gonna upload it to YouTube next week. But basically, okay, so now that I have, right, the texture separated here, I can actually get like some texture that I want to move, put it in its own layer, right, and just there, and just move it. So let's say my highlight ends really abruptly. So linear light, and I don't want shadows, so let's take them out, and I want the highlights to be a bit brighter. Not the midtones, come on. There we go, okay. So now I'm gonna hide this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend this highlight more with the skin. Just add like an extra, like more highlight going towards the skin, so it doesn't end. I mean, this highlight is fine, but sometimes you have a really like harsh highlight and then nothing. So this moving around texture is a way to, you know, blend the texture into the rest of the skin. And I can't think of anything else. Oh, I think these freckles would be great with the blue channel, probably, yeah. You know what I did before? Yeah, select all. Many ways of enhancing texture. lot. We have to be careful with the midtones. Yeah, that's better. So, do you have Henry? You just said frequency separation. So it's almost 2 hours, so give me some questions so I can answer. Oh, let's see. Yeah, see, lemon. Did it. Oh, by the way, someone asked me about the healing brush, and they were losing texture using the healing brush. And she asked me if it was possible that she was using the healing brush with 0% hardness. And yes, if you heal with 0% hardness, current and below, you will get soft edges. But most likely, the person that said that she was losing texture is because you're healing too much, or you're healing from a place that doesn't have texture, so that way there's nothing to blend. Okay? How does the healing brush works? Let me show you. The healing brush takes whatever it considers texture, right? Always 100% hard. Everything that it considers texture, and it blends it with the tone, the color and luminosity of the destination. See? Now, it didn't do a great job because there is an edge. On edges, it doesn't do a good job. It goes a bit crazy. There. But basically that's what the tool does. Gets whatever thinks is texture and blends it with the luminosity and color of the destination. Cloning, on the other hand, takes current and below, takes all of the information and literally pastes that information on the destination. Now, if you want to take advantage of the lighten and darkening features of the clone, which is what I do, you need to do it on a copy of the background. Why? Because then if I clone from dark, lighten. If I clone from dark to light, nothing happens. It works. But if you do it on an empty layer and you clone in lighten from dark to light, nothing should happen, but that happens. Because cloning, using the blending modes of the clone tool on darken or lighten, it doesn't work. You need to do it on a pixel layer. What about fake texture? I don't ever use fake texture that is not noise. I'm very particular though with when I add noise. I always try to make it look like the real texture in the image. Like for example, let's do it like this. Okay, so if you add noise, like just noise, Okay, it looks weird. Now, if you take that noise and you start shaping it, for example, you blur it and then you sharpen it, that is going to make the texture bigger, because first you blur it and then you sharpen it, so it's the same contrast as before but bigger. And now I can do it again. I can blur it more, and sharpen it again, until I get a kind of grain that, because of the size and shape, it kind of looks like real texture. See? Much better than much better than the noise I used before. So this is the changed noise, and this is actual noise. Wait, noise. So noise, my noise. It kind of looks like texture, see? Any other question? By the way, you can't use that like in too much space, or otherwise it's gonna be like really fake. But you know, for filling in a few areas, like here, now that is very soft compared to the surrounding area, you can get away with it. Like that. Same result in, I have no idea. I don't use like Camera Raw for ages. But what do you mean, the noise? Why would you want to do it in Camera Raw? In here, in Photoshop, you can control it. You can control the size. You can control the softness of it. You can mask it, and you know, keep it away from the darks, because let's face it, this background already has enough noise. So why would you want to do it in Camera Raw, where you can't mask it or change the shape or the size? Or another thing that I recommend is, some really nice people on the internet actually have scanned grain. So you can find from different cameras and film real grain. Let's see, like this, see? 35 millimeters, 16 millimeters, see? Like real grain. I think this is paid. I'm not promoting anyone. No, see? It's not. You can download it. Cool. You can download. There's a lot, not just this one. I mean, this is the first link I clicked, but I've gotten in problem with that, like for that before. So I'm not here to take any credit away from this person. But you can find a lot of scanned grain from different sources. Now, one more question, and I'm going away to cook. Did you like today streaming? I didn't get the 75 like average viewers, so I'm really pissed off at the English streaming. I'm gonna start doing only Fridays, like only in Spanish. Oh, I forgot that. Yes, okay. I didn't actually want to do it in English, so you know, none of the gurus would actually found out. Okay, I want to get rid of that because it's ugly. Yeah. Okay, so when you separate the image, okay, what you're trying to create is a split, right, between the shape and the texture. So usually for the low, we're gonna use any kind of blur, okay? I like medium. And for the high, we need the exact opposite of that filter, okay? So I need to use something that allows me to extract the filter that I use on the low and invert that. So I'm gonna use apply image because it's the only one that lets me add. Why? Because I need this. The low is image plus filter, right? So if I add that to the image, what do I get? Hello? Filter. Exactly. Very good. So for the high, what I need is to add, okay, the low, so image plus filter, to the RGB channel and invert that. Okay, for example, if I don't invert it, you can see the filter now, right? You can now see the median. But if I invert it, then you have the detail. By default, this is scale of 1 and offset 0. What does scale and offset mean? The offset is 0. 0 in Photoshop is what? Sí, pero vos ya lo viste el viernes pasado. 0 in Photoshop is... So, why do you see it white? We see it white because it's inverted. Okay, now this is the detail. The median got rid of the in the image, applied to white, right? But we don't need it in white. We need it in gray. So scale works like the maps. You know, a map of Buenos Aires in scale of 1 is gonna be the size of Buenos Aires. A map of Buenos Aires, I need a different scale, right? Usually the scales are like 1,000 to 1. In this case, we only need half. So the scale should be I always, whenever I teach this in my workshops, I tell people, hello, you're getting ahead of yourself. So, exactly, so we need half of black, because half of black is gray, and gray inverted is gray. Actually, Ryanair, I love that you repeat something that you don't understand, but no, these settings work in both 16-bit and 18-bit. The reason the other settings only work in 8 bits, it's because they are inaccurate. These settings are perfect because I'm not giving Photoshop a gray number. I'm giving Photoshop a math equation. I'm telling Photoshop I want half of black, so it's going to be exact. It's going to be exactly half of black. And this is huge, people. This is really, really huge. Wait, Guido. Every time you're about to pay for a class of someone that teaches frequency separation, ask them this before paying. Ask them why offset 0 and scale of 2. Most people only repeat what they've been told, and they don't understand it, and they don't care. They just do it that way because that's how they learned it. Does the addition of grain affect the printed image more than the digital image? It's not applied differently, and it doesn't affect the image differently. The only thing you need to take into account is that if it's going to be a print, you need to apply the noise or the grain or whatever you add to the final size image. So if it's gonna be printed in a building like 20 meters tall, then you need to actually convert the image, like enlarge it to whatever the printing size is and do the noise. Why? Because if you do it in the small image and then you extrapolate noise, it's gonna look horrible because the noise is gonna be like this big when you make it bigger. Scale of 2, offset 0. You're telling PS half of black. Scale 1. Yes, but gray is not 128, Alba. That's the thing. Okay, is 128 half of 255? You mean like this? When you say, what do you do if texture is too strong in particular part of the face? Like this? Or here? This is like basic, yeah, Ryanair, exactly. It's not 128. And that's why those settings only work in 8 bits and not in 16, because that roundup number is not good enough for 16 bits. But if you use half of black, it will work in both, because half of black is half of black. Death to all gurus. Okay, so what do you do to soften? Well, I clone in lighten and darken and basically put down the contrast in the current envelope. Lighten this. Okay, let's put it up. Like this. So if you remove the parts that create real contrast, see? You remove the parts that actually make the skin deeper or more texturated, as you said, it's gonna look softer even though you got rid of no texture. if you soften the transition, it will also look less texturated. It's not less texturated, but because there is no hard transition, it's not going to bother you. Any other question? So it finally comes out. You didn't know this about me, but I'm a huge dork and I love learning technical stuff. For more in-depth technical stuff, just go to Connie. If you think I know a lot, just talk to him for an hour. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this. Oh, I really like this. I hope you enjoyed today, the geeky day, and I'll see you again next Monday. But you better promote me, boss, because if I keep getting 50 viewers average on Mondays, I'm not gonna do English anymore. Okay, this is a threat. Help me get those 75s.